Fly like a butterfly. Fly like a butterfly. Fly like a butterfly. Fly like a butterfly.
That's nice. Wild and wonderful.
Like a fly, like a butterfly.
Hey, welcome to part 7 of the Unreal Perfect walkthrough. Now, before anything, I just want to point two things out. The first is at 0:15 when what I did is I shot a flare, I threw a flare, and that actually blocked the projectile that was coming at me, so that's why I wasn't damaged. Second of all, I was actually planning to do DasaPass through the Nally Castle, but I didn't realize how extremely long DasaCellars would be, so unfortunately I could only do 2 maps here. And that was the passage map, Dasa Mountain Pass by Misha the Sled Dog. Now, it may have seemed more detailed than most of the other passage maps, however, it was also more compact than, for example, Harab Village. I think Dasa Mountain Pass is sort of a letdown and the fault out of all of Misha's maps in Unreal. Because here you have a mapper the mapper who made Bluff Eversmoking, making something really cramped and small. But the next map is a bit more fun. Now, this map we're currently on is called Cellars at DasaPass, and obviously it was designed by Misha the Sled Dog. Now, like I just said, this is the same guy who built Bluff Eversmoking, and I don't exactly know how the Unreal team developed the scope for all for the overall level design. For example, perhaps they mapped it out beforehand, no pun intended, and Misha was assigned to develop the idea of this map into an actual map. So maybe if the lead designer or something told him, hey, this is going to be a bit of an intricate, cramped setting, a bit of a grim setting, and it'll be an interior map, no outside world. Well, if that was the case, then you can't really blame Misha the Sled Dog for not implementing a strong sense of conceptual grandness into this map. However, such a situation to me seems rather extraterrestrial, mostly because if the lead designer suggested that Misha the Sled Dog should create a cramped, dim, and ultimately circuitous map, and the suggestion itself sounds a bit cacophonous, then the lead designer is a bit off course. So maybe Misha, instead of the previous situation, thought of this map on his own, and he wanted it to be intricate and a rather compressed map. Well, if that's the case, then so be it, but hey, there's always a way to implement conceptual grandness into maps like these. Take, for example, Arence's DOM Horion for Unreal Tournament. The map is pretty cramped for the most part, focusing on narrow hallways and elongated rooms. However, it is definitely a convincing and conceptually grand map. So you ask, how did he do it? He added the wow exclamation, so to speak, into his map by stretching the map in height rather than in width and breadth. He structured it in such a way that it looks rather exaggerating, allowing him to get away with a cramped map that is ultimately quite memorable, and not to mention the atmosphere of the map, which gives a feeling of the intensity in which the player has to survive through, so to speak. So anyways, back on topic. So I think that the latter situation of Misha choosing to do this rather than being forced to is more probable. So as you can probably guess, I don't think this map is conceptually grand. Most of the rooms come off as interesting because of the detail and architecture, but I have to say that the map overall, due to its lack of visual inspiration, ends up being an unimpressive map, and a map that the player can't remember. I will certainly give it credit for the amount of detail. Every single room has something in it that reduces its brightness. The atmosphere, on the other hand, is very tricky to grade. I'd like to give it a higher rating, but I don't see why I could. I mean, atmosphere is sort of the aspect of mapping that gives the player a sense of where he or she is, as well as the map's ability to bring the concept of itself into reality. By which I mean, for example, if I wanted to create a castle, or something like that, I could either create one that has to tell you that it is a castle. Otherwise, you don't really know what it is because of its vagueness of personality, probably due to detail and undeveloped ideas. Or I could make a castle that shows you that it's a castle and not need to label it as one. It's sort of the same concept behind show don't tell in writing. So, what exactly are we in? A bunch of cellars. At least that's what the map title says. I don't really see this map as cellars. I see it perhaps as a fortified passageway or something. I mean, is there really a cellar in this map? This map looks more like it's meant to be in a game. It's a map whose purpose is only to direct the player, rather than make him or her really enter the map, so to speak. Now, the gameplay, on the other hand, is great. It's a very intense map with regards to gameplay, as evidenced by the multiple combat events and amount of monsters specially placed in tricky areas. This is probably one of the toughest fights in the entire game, is the part where you're facing the Stone Titan and infinitely spawning crawl. Other than that, I have to say that monsters such as the Brute were cleverly used, making it a bit more challenging to take them on. So, having explained the map's rating, drumroll here, atmosphere 2, conceptual grandness 1, gameplay 5, visual impact 4, and storyline implementation 0. So why, you ask, why is it 0? Well, really, there is no storyline implementation, literally. I mean, there are no translator events whatsoever, and there is no other way to convey the storyline. Just to make sure, I searched for the translator event actor in Unreal Editor, and as expected, nothing popped up. I mean, come on, if you have the time to detail this map so well, why not add something interesting in it, like Bluff Ever Smoking's subplot? So, the rating 2.4, that's ouch. This map is definitely fun with regards to gameplay, but it is definitely not memorable. And ultimately, and unfortunately, it is uninteresting. And obviously the map, as evidenced by the rating, is unbalanced as well. And it seems to me that the maps that are more balanced, for example, Bluff Ever Smoking, the Nally Castle, the sky levels, things like that, they are balanced to the extent that it's more memorable because the map doesn't focus on one aspect of it itself. For example, and a good one is again the sky levels, the sky town, wherein you aren't as focused on the architecture, the visual impact, because of the fact that there is a good amount. The gameplay is challenging to an extent. So, but however, overall, you do remember the atmosphere because it is convincing, and you do remember the gameplay because it's not too bad, and of course the conceptual grandness, things like that, and overall in the storyline. So all these, for example, if it has a 3 rating, if it has that kind of rating, then it seems to be more memorable than except the 3 rating. So that's not too bad. So if you have that kind of rating, you understand that map is probably going to be memorable, and I highly recommend not doing this. DasaCellars is a good example of why you should balance your maps. So, for example, so what if your atmosphere is not too convincing? Don't focus entirely on, for example, atmosphere and completely forget about all the other aspects. If your map has a great amount of gameplay as it does in DasaCellars, do not omit the other aspects of mapping to create, because ultimately it will result in a failed map. And this is also evident in most campaigns. So, for example, the storyline implementation in some of the campaigns, I'm looking at right here, and a good one would probably be, let me see, the Odyssey by Saravuk is a pretty good one, where the mapper seems to focus so much on visual impact and architecture that the storyline implementation is really essentially omitted. Sure, it has conceptual grandness, but even more so, the gameplay is not anything too special. So now you have a map where the player is interested to an extent. He's interested in the maps, the visual aspect of the maps. However, I don't think he has enough motivation to really go through with the overall campaign, because of the fact that the overall campaign lacks things like gameplay and story implementation. So let me give you an example that sort of emphasizes more on gameplay and storyline implementation than it does on visual impact and atmosphere and things like that, conceptual awareness. So I think the best, or one of the best examples of this would be Simon Ezekiel's Invasion, which is Zerania's Fall 2. It's a sequel, I guess. And I've played this map before, and the gameplay is okay, and the storyline implementation it's well developed, definitely for an average map. However, the visual impact is rather nauseating because of the fact that it looks so unprofessional, in my opinion. So here you have a map where the gameplay is really nice, or at least it's not bad. The storyline it grabs the player, you know, it interests him. However, the map, the overall campaign is not necessarily conceptually grand. The architecture is very simple, and so is the texturing, lighting, things like that. They all bring in the visual impact, and ultimately you get a map that, because of the fact that it's not well balanced, mostly due to the visual aspect of the map, you get a map where it's like, okay, sure, the gameplay was fine, and the story was interesting. However, because of the fact that it was visually rather unimpressive and I dare say a bit ugly. The player will look at that map more because of its fault, because its fault is so, it stands out so much. Now I'm not saying that it was completely horridly ugly. I'm saying that because of it not the visual impact being unbalanced, the campaign was not as interesting, and in fact, and again I say the player remembers it more as a campaign that looked a bit unprofessional and was somewhat fun, but it's not really, it doesn't give you the awe that some other campaigns do, such as 7 Bullets and things like that. Now let me give you a very balanced map campaign. Now I think a good example would be, for example, Sinistral's Unreal Forgotten, which is it's a fairly large campaign, and in it you see the visual impact is pretty interesting, because it's sort of a different style of mapping. So the mapper focuses more on certain aspects of the construction of a map, rather than the aspects typically focused on in Unreal and things like that. So let me tell you, the visual impact is pretty good, and there are some great ideas, visual ideas and concepts in the map that were very well developed. And simultaneously, the map, or the campaign, conveys us both visual impact and storyline to the player, and both of them are a bit interesting. And the same thing with gameplay. The gameplay, while it is not intense, is certainly balanced in accordance with the visual aspect of the map and the storyline of the map. So ultimately, you have a map that one aspect doesn't necessarily stand out. So now you're seeing a map that players see as pretty good, pretty interesting, and overall a fun map. Now that there's of course maps that sort of emphasize their aspects of their map more than others, and sometimes that's good. For example, if you have a very intense, very interesting and entertaining gameplay, then you're definitely going to have a good campaign. However, it can also be very bad. And a great example, I think, is Spatial Fear, which is pretty much a total conversion campaign for Unreal. So in this campaign, you have a very nice, slick-looking thing, sort of what Tyranny should have been, I think, something like that. And it's a very unique thing. So obviously that's going to catch the player's eye, because the player's generally expecting an Unreal atmosphere, you know, the typical Unreal map with the same texture packs and things like that. But no, he sees a very different world, and that again is eye-catching. That's important. So you get the visual impact, and even more so, the storyline is pretty well developed, definitely. However, and the gameplay is really just dull, to be honest. I mean, it's not entirely horrid, but it definitely could have been much better. There were very few ideas for the gameplay, and if I wanted to define the gameplay in this campaign as any word, I would say it's a cliche of things, because you don't see anything new out of the gameplay, nothing new out of the combat. So basically, you're doing the same old thing, and ultimately that is the problem. It focuses so much on the custom texture, the custom visual impact, I guess you could say, of the map, rather than trying to balance out the gameplay along with it. And I really didn't see what was so conceptually grand about this map. I mean, for the most part, you're in hallways, and sure, you get a sense of where you are, but it's not enough to really impact me. And this is my opinion. I really don't see why other people thought that the campaign was conceptually grand. I mean, sure, you have skyboxes and things like that, but does that really matter? What about the map itself? And I guess what I mean to say is the exterior of the map, things like you know, the sense of where you are in the map, or where you are in the world, and the visual impact that comes along with conceptual grandness is there. However, the aspect of conceptual grandness that considers the actual construction of the map is not there. So it definitely should have been considered an average in conceptual grandness. So I'd say like a 2.5 out of 5 if I was rating conceptual grandness. And so here again you have a campaign that is really focused too much on visual and does not at all consider, so it seems, that the gameplay or to an extent conceptual grandness. I mean, and of course there's no really it's difficult for the player to try to get a sense of direction of where he's going and things like that. But that's not really that important. See, and the reason I think that this is not only the gameplay in the sense of combat, but also the fact that the player is generally just going through doing such and such, having to press it, and there's really not enough combat. So if you're gonna do that, you might as well make the other aspects of gameplay interesting. You know, stop making players go around pressing this and that, having to do this and that, and make it into something entertaining. And that's definitely where it was lacking. And so ultimately, and here's what I'm trying to say by all of this, is that Spatial Fear was a campaign whose visual impact was extreme, as well as the storyline very well developed. However, because of the fact that the gameplay was so awful, in my opinion, and the conceptual grandness was average, and then that sort of goes in accordance with the gameplay. You have a campaign that the player gets bored of, you know, halfway into it, and definitely you don't want that when you're making a campaign. In my opinion, I don't know if it's beta testing or something, but it seems to me like a lot of the maps that are either unbalanced or just plain bad are maps or map campaigns that don't really have beta testers, and the ones they do have seem to be very light on things like this, that they're really taking the real moderate players, which are generally players that play campaigns. That's the general population. So I think that they should have looked for beta testers that would actually consider the gameplay. You know, tell them and actually give them some feedback. Tell them, okay, you definitely need to work on this because this isn't very interesting. And even if they are strict, okay, they're strict for a reason. So for example, the light player would see this and he'd say, oh, that's okay, but the hardcore player would say this definitely needs working on. And as a result of working on it, you're pleasing both the light and the hardcore player. So I mean, why not do it? And of course, there is the main reason, I think, is because of the laziness of some mappers. Now, I've gone through and analyzed a lot of the architecture of some of these campaigns, and the ones that are really interesting are the ones that have very interesting brushes, you know, complex brushes, things like that, that bring about the visual impact. However, in general, the map or map campaign is plain, and those complex brushes, things like that, prove to me that it's not necessarily because the mapper doesn't know how to, is new to map, he or she can't really implement these sort of interesting concepts. It's because he's lazy, and that, to me, means that this map should either not have been released.
I love gold so much that I
It should
even
have
lost
definitely
my
been
genitalia in
and
an
such a map is one that deserves an extremely low rating.
Everybody, I am from Holland. Isn't that weird? 20 here. That's your keeper. Yes. Put it in the skin box, please. Yes. And peel. Could be better. You might not want to destroy the world, but I do.
Like a fly, like a butterfly.
Wild and